Everyone's got a joke about the generations. Boomers ruined the economy, millennials killed the napkin industry, Gen Z can't survive without a phone in their hand. But sandwiched right in the middle is a generation nobody bothers to talk about at all. Generation X. Born between 1965 and 1980. They're the coworker who quietly gets everything done and never mentions it. The parent who raised you but never needed a thank you card for it. The people who built half the technology you're addicted to right now, while somehow having almost no presence on it themselves. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. Their psychology might be the most fascinating, most misunderstood of any generation alive today. It starts with one simple fact that shaped everything else. They were latchkey kids. Not a handful of them, millions. Picture it, 1978, you're 8 years old, the school bus drops you off at an empty house. No parents home yet, no babysitter, no phone to check in with anyone. You let yourself in with a key hanging around your neck on a shoelace, and you're alone until someone gets home. By 1984, close to 7 million kids between 5 and 13 were doing exactly this on a regular basis. That's not a handful of unlucky kids. That's an entire generation learning at 8 years old that nobody is coming to save you. You figure it out yourself, or it doesn't get figured out at all. That empty house rewired something fundamental in their brains. Psychologists call it a high contingency environment. Every action had a real, immediate consequence with no adult to soften the landing. You made a bad choice, you lived with what happened next. No appeals process, no feelings meeting, just cause and effect, clean and unforgiving. And that wiring didn't go away when they grew up, it just got quieter. Today, it shows up as this almost eerie ability to read a room, anticipate problems before they arrive, and stay calm when everything around them is falling apart. They're not unfeeling, they're just always 3 steps ahead, because they had to be. But the latchkey house was only the beginning, because Gen X didn't just grow up alone, they grew up watching. And what they watched taught them something much darker than loneliness. They watched their parents preach commitment, loyalty, doing the right thing, and then they watched those same parents get divorced at record rates. Through the 70s and 80s, divorce rates in America nearly doubled from the decade before. 1 in 2 marriages was ending. And for a kid who is already spending half the afternoon alone, that instability at home sent a message that landed deep. The people who are supposed to stay don't always stay. The promises adults make are negotiable. Then they watched their fathers, men who gave 20, 30 years to a single company, who never called in sick, who believed in the deal. And then one Tuesday morning, those men came home early with a cardboard box and a pink slip. Victims of downsizing, restructuring, whatever corporate language was being used that year to describe betrayal. The lesson wrote itself. The system will use you and then discard you. Loyalty flows one direction. Psychologists call the response defensive pessimism. You hope things go well, but you plan, privately and thoroughly, for them not to. Gen X didn't invent cynicism, they just earned it honestly. And here's where it gets interesting. That defensive pessimism isn't actually pessimism at all. It's a coping strategy, backed by research. Studies out of Wellesley College found that people who use defensive pessimism consistently outperform optimists in high-pressure situations because they've already mentally rehearsed the failure. They've already solved problems that haven't happened yet. What looks like a bad attitude from the outside is actually a finely tuned internal simulation running constantly in the background. They're not negative, they're prepared. There's a difference. This is also exactly why you barely see them on social media. Not because they don't understand it, they built it. But they grew up in a world where privacy was the default, not the exception. If you did something embarrassing at 16, maybe 10 people knew. Maybe it got mentioned once at a party and then it was gone. There was no permanent record, no screenshot, no comment section. To Gen X, broadcasting your daily life online doesn't feel like connection. It feels like exposure. And exposure, in their experience, is how you get hurt. So they watch, they observe. They know exactly what's happening, they just don't perform it back to you. Then there's the irony. The detachment. The way Gen X can make a joke about almost anything and keep moving without flinching. This didn't come from nowhere. Try growing up during the Cold War. In elementary school, teachers calmly walked them through nuclear fallout drills. Duck under your desk, cover your head, as if a wooden chair was going to protect you from thermonuclear annihilation. Adults said it with straight faces. Everything's fine. Also, civilization could end any random Tuesday. When you're raised inside that kind of split reality, holding two completely contradictory truths at once, you develop a specific psychological reflex. You laugh so you don't scream. Psychologists call it ironic detachment, a protective buffer between yourself and things you cannot control. It looks like not caring. It's actually a very sophisticated form of emotional self-regulation, and it bled into everything. Their music, their movies, the entire cultural output of the 80s and 90s is soaked in it. Slacker comedies, grunge, reality biting back. A whole generation processing collective anxiety through the language of not being impressed by anything. But underneath that cool surface was something nobody talked about enough. These were kids carrying enormous emotional weight, with no vocabulary for it, and no adults consistently present enough to help them carry it. They learned to store it quietly. No drama, no fanfare. Just keep moving. Which brings you to their work ethic, and this is the part that surprises people most. Gen X does not post LinkedIn manifestos about hustle. They don't build personal brands around their productivity. They just show up and do the work, reliably, without ceremony. This was forged early. Paper routes before sunrise at 12 years old, bagging groceries after school, running a register at a fast food counter, and doing the change math in their head when the system went down because someone had to. These weren't resume builders. They were raw introductions to adult accountability before they had adult bodies. They watched corporate America hollow out their parents, so they never believed in blind company loyalty. But they became obsessed with something else entirely: competence, being undeniably good at what they do. They understood early that they couldn't control whether they'd get laid off, but they could control whether they were the last person anyone would want to let go. So they made themselves indispensable, quietly, without needing anyone to notice, without needing the credit. That's not a work style. That's armor. And it's held together by the same logic as everything else in their psychology. You can't rely on the system, but you can rely on yourself. Here's the paradox that sits at the center of it all. Gen X is simultaneously the most fiercely independent generation alive and the most quietly loyal one. They will never ask you for help. Been solving their own problems since they were 8 years old, and asking felt like admitting failure. Research consistently shows Gen Xers report significantly lower rates of seeking social support during periods of high stress. Not because they lack people to turn to, but because the act of asking was never modeled for them as safe. You handled it yourself. That was the rule. That was survival. But if you need them, they show up. No announcement, no post about what a good person they are, no expectation of recognition in return. They just appear, do what needs doing, and leave without making it a moment. This comes from forming the kind of friendships that only happen when parents are absent and you genuinely need each other to get through the week. Your friends became your family not as a metaphor, but as a functional reality. And that loyalty, forged in necessity, runs deeper than most people ever understand looking in from the outside. Their relationship with authority tells you everything. They don't respect titles, they respect competence. If you've earned your position through genuine skill and hard-won knowledge, they will follow you without question. But if you're a well-dressed executive who talks smoothly and doesn't actually know what you're doing, they will see through it in about 4 minutes, and they will work around you quietly and efficiently while smiling at every meeting. They grew up watching Watergate. They watched the Iran-Contra hearings. They watched the AIDS crisis get ignored by the people whose job it was to respond to it. They learned early and permanently that authority and competence are not the same thing, and blind obedience is something other people do. Economically, they got hit over and over. The oldest ones graduated into a recession. The middle ones watched their savings evaporate in the dot-com crash. The youngest came of age just in time for 2008 to detonate what was left. 3 direct hits across one lifetime, which is why so many of them have multiple income streams, not because they're naturally entrepreneurial, but because they've been taught by lived experience that any single source of income is a liability. Diversify or get destroyed. No drama, no fanfare, just adapt and keep moving. Here's the truth about Generation X. They are the bridge generation, the ones who grew up in the last moment before everything became digital, permanent, and public, and then personally built the world that replaced it. They remember what boredom felt like, what it meant to sit alone with your thoughts and have nothing to distract you from them. They remember earning information slowly, carrying it carefully, using it deliberately. And they carried all of that into a world that moves at a speed they helped create, but never entirely trusted. They are not the loudest generation. They will not remind you of what they've done. They don't need the credit, and they're not waiting for the parade. But if you've ever had a Gen X parent, or worked beside a Gen X colleague, or been pulled back from a bad decision by someone who saw it coming from 3 weeks away and said nothing until the right moment, you already know what this generation is. They're the ones holding things together while everyone else argues about who deserves the credit. If that resonated with you, if you're Gen X and finally felt seen, or if you're from another generation and something just clicked about the person who raised you or the coworker who never talks about themselves, I'm glad you were here for this one. Thank you, genuinely, for watching.